So unless you've been living under a rock, you will definitely have seen Lara Croft at some point. She was very prevalent back in the day, not just in video game circles but in general pop culture. There was a successful film and a best-selling comic series created from the critically acclaimed video game series which pioneered platforming and action-adventure games. She even appeared in the Guinness Book of Records for most successful human video game heroine in 2006. A lot of her success came down to an appearance of a strong independent woman appearing in a male-dominated area, and her resilience and ability to survive hard situations, breaking out of the usual damsel in distress trope commonly shown with women in video games such as Princess Peach, who's shown to be this useless side character with no backbone or personality, whose sole purpose appears to be something for Mario to rescue. Unfortunately, a lot of her initial success also stemmed from her sexualization, and she is even sometimes regarded as a negative role model due to her over-sexualization and unrealistic body standards. The developer company behind Tomb Raider, Eidos, noticed this and exploited her sex appeal in future games and marketing. You know, for all those basement dwellers out there. And this once again proves that sex sells. So yeah, Tomb Raider is one of the OGs, first released in 1996 for the PlayStation 1, Sega Saturn and PC. The first game was very well received to critical acclaim. 12 months later, Tomb Raider 2 was released, also to positive reviews and as a PlayStation exclusive this time. 13 months later, Tomb Raider 3 was released. However, by then, the magic of the game was beginning to decline a bit due to the developers failing to tackle new territory and simply rehashing the same gameplay elements from the previous games. Criticism was also directed towards the game's tough difficulty level. Less than a year later, Tomb Raider The Last Revelation was released, and things were not looking good. The team behind Lara Croft were exhausted as they'd been working constantly since 1996 to push out new games, as well as the general consensus that the series was beginning to get stale. Although Core Design, the actual development team behind Tomb Raider, was getting tired of it and wanted the series to end, the publishing company Eidos insisted that the series continued. The following November, the series was still going, with Tomb Raider Chronicles being released for the PS2. It received average reviews, and critics agreed generally that the developers were quickly running out of ideas. After the poor reviews of Angel of Darkness, the development team switched to Crystal Dynamics and the planned trilogy series was scrapped. At this point, the series was losing its direction a little. There was all these new series and spin-offs planned and remakes, and although the follow-up games were positively received, they felt uninspired and stale. It was not until Square Enix, famous makers of Final Fantasy, took over and came out with Tomb Raider in 2013, which was truly the kick up the backside the series needed. The game was very well received upon release, praise going towards the gameplay, setting, characters, graphics and plot, although the multiplayer and paradoxical gameplay was criticised. In this video, I'm going to be going through the good and the bad bits of this game and whether it is worth adding to your game collection. So let us get into it. So the main game is single player and in the third person. Survival, combat and platforming are core elements in the gameplay, and you can get around by climbing using zip lines and footpaths. If you're familiar with the previous Tomb Raider games, it is not too different from them, although obviously more sophisticated, and now you can sneak around and hide from or secretly attack your enemies. The environment is also destructible to a certain extent and more interactive than the previous games. Much to my despair, quick time moments are included quite a lot in the game, and if you watch my video on God of War, you will know my opinion on them. But if you haven't, basically, I don't really like quick time sequences, as I just think they're a lazy way of adding false difficulty to a game without actually doing anything or adding anything significant. I also dislike them as they do not really require any skill or thinking, just to have a fast finger or quick reflexes, and I especially dislike them in action games as they break up the flow of the gameplay. Very rarely QuickTime events are well used in games such as Shenmue, but unfortunately Tomb Raider is not one of them. If you've ever played Uncharted, you will notice the similarities between the combat and the stealth system. I would say the developers definitely took some inspiration from them. There is a feature called Survival Instinct, which highlights items or nearby locations of interest to you, which is quite a common thing in platform action games. The game also has some RPG gameplay, rewarding you with extra skills and storage for your weapons and ammo for completing certain in-game tasks and developing your character. There is a certain level of customization, allowing you to upgrade Lara and her weapons/equipment. As well as the main story, you can also complete side quests and explore parts of the island you did not complete and explore other tombs. That's the extent of the single player gameplay, but there is also a multiplayer mode, as I mentioned before. There are 3 different modes with different weapons and destructible environments, but otherwise it is a pretty standard multiplayer setup. 5 different maps split into 2 teams of 4 players each. Team Deathmatch is basically just player versus player. I don't think I really need to explain that. Private Rescue mode is more or less just capture the flag, and Cry for Help mode is where one team goes out and hunts for batteries to power the radio beacon, while the other team is hunting them. So overall, while not the most original game in the world, it is still very, very good. The combat and traversing is smooth and fluid. The game areas change as you go on, and no 2 areas are the same. The survival and character development is very well implemented as well. The only part that lets down the gameplay is the multiplayer, which feels lackluster at best and also unnecessary. So this is my rating regarding the gameplay and the pros and cons. I don't really have a lot to say about the graphics besides the fact that they are an excellent blend of CGI and performance capture. It still holds up today even on low performance graphics drivers such as an older Intel program or last gen consoles such as 360 or PS3. Arguably the graphics could pass as an early Xbox One or PS4 game. They are both realistic and very well done, with few graphical glitches, so Tomb Raider did well in this area for sure. In a nutshell, Yamatai, which is a fictional lost island in the Dragon's Triangle off the coast of Japan, serves as the setting for the game. Given its reputation for terrifying storms and the shipwrecks that dot its coastline, the island, and the monarchy that once stood there, is shrouded in mystery. Himiko, often known as the Sun Queen, was a monarch who formerly governed Yamatai. According to tradition, she possessed shamanic abilities that allowed her to manipulate the weather. Apart from the fact that the island's notoriety was created immediately after Himiko's passing, little is known about Yamatai's past in the years after her death. Lara Croft discovers while exploring the island that, among others, Portuguese traders, US Marines, and the Japanese military project were all stranded on Yamatai at various times in history. A vicious cult of thieves, mercenaries, and shipwreck survivors known as the Solari Brotherhood dominate the island at the beginning of the game. The story explores the actual reason and purposes of the Solari Brotherhood, who created their own society centered on the worship of Himiko, complete with a social structure and rules. Lara Croft, a young and talented archaeology graduate, has persuaded the Nishimura family, who are descendants of the Yamatai people themselves, to undertake an expedition to find the ancient kingdom of Yamatai, based on her theories about where it may be. Important characters in the game include Conrad Roth, a former Royal Marine turned adventurer and close friend of the Croft family, who serves as Lara's mentor. Samantha Nishimura, who's Lara's friend and a representative of the Nishimura family who films the expedition for a documentary. And Jocelyn Reyes, a skeptic and temperamental mechanic and single parent who's also part of the expedition. I'll briefly go into the plot and where you are when you start the game, so skip ahead if you do not want to see some minor spoilers. Lara embarked on her first journey aboard the ship Endurance with the goal of discovering the long-lost Yamatai kingdom. The expedition enters the Dragon's Triangle at her request, and despite Whitman's counsel, the survivors are left alone on the remote island after the ship is hit by a fierce storm and sinks. Lara escapes a cave after being separated from the others and discovers additional proof that the island is inhabited as she searches for the other survivors. So basically, it's not really a million miles away from the older Lara Croft games, but it also has a new interesting location and premise. I haven't really covered DLC in my previous videos much, and when I have, I've just kind of glossed over them rather than go into much detail about them, so from now on I'll dedicate a section of the video to it when appropriate. So yeah, the first bit of DLC was the Caves and Cliffs map pack, which is 3 extra Tomb Raider multiplayer maps titled Scavenger Caverns, Cliff Shantytown and Burning Village, and the 1939 map pack, which contains 2 extra multiplayer maps named Dogfight and Forest Meadow. There was also a Japanese version of the game added to Steam by Square Enix, which meant Japanese fans of the series could now enjoy Tomb Raider. One final multiplayer map pack is available containing 2 maps named Lost Fleet and Himiko's Cradle. Finally, there was an outfit pack containing 3 outfits for Lara released, to be used in single player mode. So nothing particularly weird or wonderful with the DLC, pretty standard stuff. It could have done with maybe some extra single player content or perhaps weapons or ability packs. In my opinion, I feel you're not getting much for what you're paying for. Without a doubt, this was considered one of the best looking games of 2013 and still holds up very well in 2022. It passes pretty well as an early Xbox One PS4 game even. It was later ported to these consoles anyway and is still definitely worthwhile playing in 2022. There are also active subreddits for the game to discuss with fellow redditors, and I believe the multiplayer is still up and running, so definitely check out Tomb Raider if you can. Overall, although Tomb Raider isn't perfect and the most original game out there, it is still a very rewarding experience with its ambitious survival elements and smooth rich graphics. Both fans and newcomers to the series will definitely enjoy this game. I myself really enjoyed Tomb Raider and glad that I played it, even though I'd say I've only really a passing interest in the Lara Croft series. Looking back, the strong points are definitely in the gameplay and graphics and Lara's character and development. The superfluous multiplayer mode, however, was the biggest letdown, unfortunately. Here's my overall rating for Tomb Raider 2013, taking into consideration all of the points that I've covered earlier in the video. So that wraps up our game review. If you've made it this far, I hope you enjoyed it. If there's any games or podcast ideas you have, be sure to comment them down below, or even just any video ideas in general. I'm open to. I haven't picked my next podcast topic yet, but I will begin work on it over the next week or two when I have time. This may or may not be my last video for a while, as I'm starting college again real soon, so I'll be up to my eyes unfortunately with all the travelling and assignments I'm going to have. So I just thought I'd let you know where I'll be when I randomly disappear. But I will be sure to make some videos when I have the chance, because, I love doing this. So yeah, thanks again for listening to this game review. Like and subscribe, you know the drill, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks again for watching, and goodbye.